to work with the SWARM program. Thank you all for joining us. What you have on the screen here is our hub of sorts for the ACCAP 50 rule that governs what we do here in the Land and Water Resource Management. Here we've added a new button to all the other new buttons that we've had to take you directly to the office hour sessions. So any of the previous webinars that we've hosted are now embedded directly into this section, and then there's links for the future ones. So after today, once this recording is made available, we'll get that updated and it'll be available here as well, so you can refer back to it and refer to the previous sessions that we've had, along with all of our other ACCAP 50 practice specific information, frequently asked questions, and contact information and further resources over here on the side as well.
All right, Randy, can you take us through soil health brief?
Sure can, Katie. You're seeing my screen, I hope. Yeah. Good. All right, so thank you. My name is Randy Zogbaum. I am a DECAP soil health specialist, and just going to chat briefly a little bit about soil health and what it is and how this fits into our practices. Soil health is, well, first, soil is recognizing the soil as a vital living ecosystem. The soil health, what soil health does is gives us the guiding principles to make sure that that ecosystem is functioning fully. It's a systems thinking approach to our conservation, and as Cody's going to talk about in a few minutes, with this conservation and crop rotation and all the practices, planning is an important part of that, and thinking about the whole system of the soil really helps us piece these apart. With this conservation crop rotation, each one of these principles has a component within that. And when we're thinking about each, the practices or the rotation as it goes in this case, working on building out the principles of soil health will help us meet our conservation goals. And then bringing it back fully into the system is then again the goal. The last thing I'll say about soil health is, if you haven't heard already, we have online training, introduction to soil health training, which I'll drop the link to that in the chat. Along with this flyer is basically our soil health website, so I'll drop that into the chat as well. With that, I'll pass it back to Katie and move on.
All right, guys, looking forward, I'd like to invite Cody to deliver our kind of technical overview of the conservation crop rotation practice.
All right, thank you. Yep, I'm Cody Hawkins. I'm the Nutrient Management Policy Specialist, so I will cover some of the technical things related to crop rotation here. So what is that conservation crop rotation? Keep in mind that this is based on the current 2015 version of this standard. It was updated recently through the Standards Oversight Council in the last year, and they're anticipating publishing that next year. When we were revising ACCAP 50, some of the things that we included in ACCAP 50 were with that revision in mind, but you can still implement the standard accordingly and still meet the requirements in ACCAP 50. So when we're talking about crop rotation, we're talking about a conservation specific crop rotation. It's a planned sequence of different crops grown on the same field to reduce erosion, improve soil health, protect water quality, manage pests, and increase crop yield. For eligible costs, we're talking about diversifying that rotation, utilizing conservation crop rotation. We're looking at integrating things like cover crops or small grains, or incorporating things like perennial crops or even livestock integration. And then we have this other thing where we can talk about other innovative practices approved by the department. We haven't gone too much in detail on number 5 yet, but if we ever get to that point, we can talk about it. So just going back to the purposes of that conservation practice standard, primarily a lot of the times you're probably going to be utilizing this practice for sheet, rill, and wind erosion, or like soil health and improving water quality. I haven't seen a lot of use of this practice lately for like plant pest pressures, but that's something you can utilize it for. And something that we buffed quite a bit for the newer revision is improving that providing feed and forage for domestic livestock section of that practice standard. But you can still utilize the current practice standard. It's just that the newer one has some more metrics to it and some more, helpful considerations when you're planning that. But that won't be published until next year. Just some tools and resources for you. Just a link to the general practice standard if you need to go in there, refresh your memory on what's in there. It's the general criteria for that standard and other considerations. And then there's this conservation crop rotation job sheet, which I will click on and share briefly. Let me know if you can see that or if you can only see my PowerPoint still. You can see this? Okay. So this is just the implementation requirements that you'll refer to. Covers a lot of the same stuff that standard does, but it comes with this kind of handy, conservation crop rotation sheet. I believe NRCS is also intending to update this with the practice revision, but I haven't seen this yet. But this is a good place for you for documentation locally. What is that baseline rotation? What is the new rotation? What are the changes to things like soil loss or improvements to soil loss, improvements to, the phosphorus index, or improvements to other resources that you're documenting and things like that. This isn't a page that we're requesting be submitted along with the reimbursement, but it's something for your records. As well, if you're utilizing SNAP Plus for planning, a lot of the same stuff is, available in SNAP Plus. Let me see how to get back to my screen here. Okay. Back to slideshow. So again, like I was mentioning before, this practice standard was revised. So if you want to see what that revision looks like, you can go to the Standards Oversight Council, just for planning purposes, thinking about some of the metrics that we included in there. When we're talking about the 15 standard, it has a little bit of information on how to use the practice standard for soil erosion. But in the new standard, we incorporated things like, making sure that you're at or below T, or that you have a soil conditioning index of like 20 or less if you're trying to do this through no-till and things like that. So, and NRCS anticipates that published next year. If you're interested, you can click on this link to go and review the revised standard, keeping in mind that it has all the other public comments with it. We don't have a copy of the standard finalized yet. So once that is published by NRCS, we will have that.
Hey, Cody, before you
Yeah.
move on, because your slide deck is not clickable for the participants of this webinar, how can everyone access these links?
I will post those up. I'll post these all in the chat, and then we can probably send out a follow-up email with all the links, or we can include them in like probably in the recording somewhere.
Thank you.
Right, so things to consider or questions you might get when you're implementing this practice standard specifically is just, when to consider using conservation crop rotation. One example that we came up with was, we can already cost share for changes in tillage. We can cost share engineering practices, but sometimes, you might be working with a landowner where they've already done all they can with tillage. And you're on to considering different crops in their rotation, maybe cover crops, they're already doing that, but maybe they need something like a longer term perennial cover in there. Maybe they need to incorporate small grains. They need to bump up the residue in their rotation. This is a good way to do that. Considering other practices you might implement alongside this, cover crops, reduce or no-till. Maybe there's some structural practices you might also need to incorporate in there, especially if they're on some pretty steep slopes. Making sure that this aligns with your other goals for like soil health or soil erosion or things like that. The example that we came up with, was talking with landowners that are in NMFE, and they're working through nutrient management, but they need some additional tools to meet compliance. This is a good way to maybe help incentivize that. And we will have some example rotations in the future that we'll send out with this, but ultimately what matters is that you're showing an improvement in a resource concern. You're showing less soil loss, you're showing an improvement in the phosphorus index or things like that, and documenting those resource concerns. So, if it's just a straight corn bean rotation, but they're adding wheat and maybe a cover crop, but they're still doing a lot of tillage and they're still over T, we wouldn't really consider that a conservation crop rotation. It might still meet the definition of a crop rotation, but there's that conservation aspect that you have to consider, and those considerations are within the standard. That'll tell you, if you're using this practice for soil loss, these are the things you should use for criteria and for considerations. And with that, I think we go back to Swarm. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to send them in the chat. As you are working with landowners on this practice, feel free to reach out. We can talk about how to incorporate some of these things, via Snap Plus or, other planning tools. But it is meant to be just another tool for you guys in your toolbox when maybe some of the other practices that you're already doing still aren't getting that landowner or that operator to where you're trying to go. I believe popcorn back to Haley.
Thanks, Cody. Again, my name is Haley Russer. I work with the SWARM program in Land and Water Resources Department. What the ACCAP 50 update did, it provided more tools and additional practices, but the reimbursement process is mostly the same. We have updated our forms, and those are available on the SWARM grant resources section of the DATCAP website. What SWARM does cover is the complete conservation crop rotation plan as well as the monitoring plan. We will need a nutrient management plan checklist with your reimbursement packet, along with your request for reimbursement and your contract. But the additional documentation here that we're looking for is the nutrient management plan checklist. We have added a section, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, for the continuing compliance acknowledgement on the contract. So when you're contracting, there's a section on the last page of the contract to indicate that continuing compliance. SWARM is not cost sharing the maintenance efforts for the duration of the contract, but we are funding the planning process. This practice is available for a maximum rate of $10 an acre. So it's not a cost sharing, it is a maximum rate practice. So we would contract for 3 or 4 years. SWARM is limited to 4 years on this practice, and we would like to see at least 3 years. So it could be 3 or 4 years at that maximum rate of $10 an acre. We can go ahead to the next slide, Cody. So when can these practices be cost shared? Again, as I said before, so the length of the contract would require county monitoring. So you would need to verify that these practices are being rotated. The land cannot be in permanent cover or had years of rotation followed by establishment of the perennial crop, and that is outlined in statute. So it needs to be a newly adopted practice for the landowners. So we are looking at new conservation, not funding previous practices. You can go ahead to the next one, Cody. So this, I spoke to briefly, this is that last page of the contract, and up in the upper right, that continuing compliance statement, you are acknowledging that you have put together a continuing compliance plan, and we do have an optional form available for you that we'll talk about in a second to make that easier. We don't require it for reimbursement, but we are looking for the verification that the county and the landowner have put together a plan on maintaining these practices that are being cost shared. So we can go ahead and take a look at that form on the next slide. This new resource, it is also available on the SWARM grant resources forms page. So it is form 025, and it's called Certification of Non-Engineering Practices. It is just an additional tool. You can use your own tool, or you can use the one that we have made available to identify your resource concerns and put together a long-term maintenance plan with the landowner. We do not require it for reimbursement. We're not looking for a copy of the plan, whatever tool you use, but we are relying on that continuing compliance statement from you and the landowner on the contract to acknowledge that that's been completed. We can go to the next one. So this is from the reimbursement form. So we have also changed that reimbursement form. So on page 2 for the non-engineered practices and the multi-year cropping practices, we are asking the county to verify that you've reviewed that multi-year plan and that the practice was established properly before you are requesting the reimbursement. And then that would be certified on that reimbursement form submitted along with the contract as well as the nutrient management checklist. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you all may have on that process, or I can put in the chat a link to those form sections on our website as well.
Haley, I have a question. This is Katie Abbott from Iowa County. So I'm just curious how payment works for this, since it's, a 3 or 4 year rotation. Do they get paid for 4 years up front? Do we pay them every year? Do we wait till we've proven that they've done the whole rotation and pay at the end? And if we pay up front, then like what happens if in year 3 or 4 they stop following the rotation?
Right. So we've talked about this extensively at DATCAP. We are expecting it to run similar to how nutrient management planning works, where you pay up front. And then if for whatever reason, with this practice specifically, if the crops are not being rotated or it's not a conservation crop rotation, they're not following the standard, the county would have the ability to go back to the landowner per their contract and request repayment of the cost share. So whatever was paid to that landowner should be paid back to the county directly, since they're not meeting their part of the contract.
Got it. Thank you.
Great question. Thanks, Katie.
Does anybody else have any questions or needs for resources? And if there's none, we'll still hang around for a little bit, if you think of anything. Otherwise, we hope you'll reach out to us with questions as they arise. And thank you for your time this morning.